Can the New Orleans Saints stay alive in the NFC playoff race? And is that even what Saints fans want? We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs and Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am James Yarko, one of the hosts of Locked On Bucs, joined by the infamous Ross Jackson, the host of Locked On Saints. You could check out both of us on those shows 5 days a week on YouTube or your favorite podcatcher of choice. And of course, on Twitter, I am at JYarko_Bucks. He is at Ross Jackson NOLA. And this crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. The biggest matchups and the most important players coming up for you in just a little while. But Ross, let's go ahead and start off with the biggest stories surrounding our teams. I am going to open the floor for you because I'm not sure what direction you're going to go with with this one, because there's a lot going on with the Saints right now. So what is the biggest thing going on with the New Orleans Saints right now?
Yeah, it might feel tough to pick, but honestly, I mean, the biggest thing here is whether or not the New Orleans Saints make the playoffs. And that's not just about having a postseason appearance. That's not just about saying whether or not the season was, quote unquote, a success or not, which I think overwhelmingly it has not been a success so far for the New Orleans Saints. I think that's fair to say. But the other part of it is, what's the future of this franchise at this point? Do the New Orleans Saints continue to, if they miss the playoffs here, kick the can down the road? And well, they kind of have to kick the can down the road. They don't have a choice. But do they continue to kind of go about it with that sort of win now mentality? Do they finally embrace the rebuild, embrace the retool? Which way do they go? Well, if the Bucs embarrass the Saints the way that they did early on in the season, what does that mean for head coach Dennis Allen? I mean, there's a lot of big question marks here that all kind of come down to one aspect, which is, can the New Orleans Saints win these last two games and put themselves on a trajectory to potentially not only save their season, but maybe save some people's future with the organization?
Yeah, it's certainly been ups and downs. I think both of our listeners can relate to that, the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows of the season. Both teams with a new quarterback. Sometimes the performances have been good, sometimes not so much. And so you're looking at two teams that are fighting to get into the playoffs, but obviously the road for Tampa is much easier than the road for New Orleans in that case. And it's something that David and I have talked about on our show for years is the fact that every year the Saints seem to be in this cap hell, and every year they seem to still spend all of this money. And you're right, they do continue to kick the can down the road. And I don't think there's a team in the NFL better at restructuring and kind of manipulating the cap the way that New Orleans has been. But at some point, they do have to pay that bill. It will come due. At some point, it's just a matter of, like you said, do they own up and they just go ahead and eat it, kind of the way Tampa has done this year with the $81 million in dead cap because of all the win now mentality for the Brady years? Or do they see that this is still a competitive enough division that they can win now, and then once you get into the tournament, anything can happen?
Yeah, I think that one of the big things, and I'm happy to hear you kind of acknowledge that the idea of the option, right? Because I think the one thing that always gets left out of this conversation, particularly from the national pundits that have no idea really how any of this works, they try to sort of talk about this idea of, well, the bill's going to come due and the Saints are going to have to, suck it up and all this other stuff. But the fact of the matter is that the Saints choose when that happens. They choose when they want to say, okay, we're done for this year, or whatever that pause is going to be in terms of spending and taking that sort of salary cap and maybe going with the rookie quarterback later on, or a contract at some point, a rookie contract at some point in the next couple of years, or a 1-year deal on a quarterback that's fighting for something like the Bucs did this year and have done so successfully, particularly over the course of the past couple of weeks. I think that that's something that often gets left out of the conversation. If the Saints will choose when that time comes, will it be 2024? seems unlikely because, I mean, look, they're locked into a $150 million quarterback. They have, enough guys that they can restructure 3 or 4 guys to get under the salary cap again, spend money and go make a run at it again next year. But if they end up moving on from their head coach, how does that end up impacting that? Which, by the way, feels unlikely. More likely is a change in offensive coordinator, all these other things. But still, no matter which way you slice it, over the course of the next 2 games, someone's fighting for their job here in the city of New Orleans. So that's easily the biggest story here. What about for Tampa?
Yeah, the biggest story around the Buccaneers is win and you're in. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
That's the long and short of it. With the win against the Saints, the Buccaneers clinched the NFC South for the 3rd straight season. And that would make them one of 2 teams in the NFL to make the playoffs in each of the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. And it also improves their win total over last year by at least 1 game when they won the division at 8-9, which is a shock to a lot of people that don't listen to Locked On Bucs, because David and I have been saying since May that this could, is probably going to be a 10-win team or more. And they're exactly in line with that 10 wins, even without Tom Brady, even without Leonard Fournette, even with $81 million in dead cap. And the Bucs are looking to go 2-0 against the Saints for the 2nd year in a row and put themselves in a position to finish 5-1 against the division for the first time since 2007. We're talking the John Gruden years.
Yep.
And a big part of that has been the play of Baker Mayfield over the last 2 weeks, but it's been the team as a whole during this 4-game win streak. And I did have one of the Locked On Bucs insiders reach out and ask me a question to ask you. And that was, has or will Cam Jordan retract his offseason statement that without Tom Brady, the Bucs were going to, quote, go back to where Tampa Bay has been?
No.
Can you ask him if he would like to comment on those comments?
Yeah, I can. I'm sure I'll talk to him at some point this week. But if you know anything about Cam Jordan, the last thing Cam Jordan's ever going to do is back down on a statement that he made. I don't think that, 1 season of a single digit win division title is going to change his, or potentially double digit, right? I mean, they've got the Carolina Panthers to close out the season, so probably double digit. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that that's going to change Cam Jordan's mind. I think that the Bucs would have a lot more convincing to do beyond just 1 season for him to ever even get close to retracting a statement. I mean, it's Cam Jordan. Like, he doesn't retract statements.
That is true. Also, he has to worry about actually producing against Luke Gedeke, which is not something he did in that first game. But
got to worry about producing, period, which is something he hasn't been able to do over the course of the past few weeks. I mean, let's be real here, right? Like Cam's great at everything, but he hasn't been the guy that everyone's expected. I know he's coming off an injury. He's only been on the field for rundowns and stuff like that. But I don't think he's in position to talk massive stuff. But he's definitely not in position to take anything back that he's already said.
Yeah. And of course, the insider sent that in a little tongue in cheek, the same way that they were reaching out when I was setting up for my crossover with Julian earlier this year, because he was the one that said that the Bucs were going to fall back into obscurity where they belong within the NFC South, something I won't let him forget. But, you go back. I actually sat down and I watched the Bucs Saints game from early in the year, because it has been so long since that game occurred. A lot has changed. And I forgot a lot of kind of the storylines that were going on there. The Bucs didn't have Jamel Dean. They lost Ryan Neal on the 3rd play. They lose Mike Evans in the first half. But on the flip side, the Saints didn't have Ruiz. You had Derek Carr dealing with that shoulder injury, so he was hampered a little bit. It was Kamara's first game back. But yeah, watching Cam Jordan, he did not have a productive game at all. He was involved on a roughing the passer penalty. He wasn't called on it. It wasn't roughing by him, but it was a high-low shot on Baker Mayfield on a touchdown pass to Cade Otton. But other than that, Cam Jordan's name really wasn't said a whole lot during that broadcast. But we are going to talk more about the biggest matchups and the important players that are going to decide this game. That is coming up next on a crossover episode of Locked On Saints and Locked On Bucs here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America, and they are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, You pick more than or less than on a 2 to 6 player stat projection line and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is really simple to play, and I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. This week, I'm taking Baker Mayfield for more than 235.5 passing yards, Chris Godwin more than 61.5 receiving yards, and Mike Evans more than 68.5 receiving yards. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL, all one word, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Thank you again for making Locked On Saints and Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every single day. Everydayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow as Ross is going to put the final touches on this week's preview, and David and I will do the same from the Bucs perspective. But in the meantime, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Ross, you take a look at the way that these two teams matched up. And as I mentioned, I watched that game earlier today, and it was a pretty even first half. When you watch the way these defenses were playing against the opposing offenses, it was pretty even up until you had that big swing at the end of the first half. Baker Mayfield throws an interception at the 1 yard line. And then on the very next play, Antoine Winfield Jr. forces a fumble, recovers it. The Bucs score quickly. All of a sudden, the game felt like it kind of got out of reach with Derek Carr waiting until the fourth quarter to reach 100 passing yards. But we talked about how he's dealing with that shoulder injury. So you take a look at kind of how close that one was, where the teams are now. What is the matchup that you are looking for that is really going to be a big part of this game for the Saints?
Yeah, I think you have to look at the pass rush for New Orleans, and that might be without Cam Jordan. Cam Jordan's going to play. However, what's been sort of the trajectory for him over the course of the past few games while he's been dealing with his ankle injury, just because of having to plant his foot, cut, things like that, is that he's been more of a run defender than he has been a pass rusher. So what the Saints have been doing in terms of pass rush, particularly over on the edges, is that they're using Carr Granderson, who's got 8.5 sacks on the season so far, leads the team in that category. But on the opposite side, they've been using former off-ball linebacker, former Wisconsin pass rusher, Zack Baun, and finally asking Zack to do the thing that he was drafted for, right? 12.5 sacks his last year at Wisconsin, 19.5 tackles for a loss. Feels like that should have been the thing that he's been doing since he was drafted back in 2020. Now the Saints kind of finally figured out, like, oh, wait, he's a pretty darn good pass rusher. So it's good to see that they're finally figured that part out of it. But are they going to be able to produce? Because look, I think the Saints are very talented on their back end. Paulson Adebo, Isaac Yiadom, Alontae Taylor in the slot. Rookie Jordan Howden's been really good for them so far. He missed on Wednesday with an illness, but we'll see if he's still able to play. It seems likely, but we'll see what happens there. And then, of course, Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger, is still back there as well and playing well. But look, those guys aren't going to be able to do anything if Baker Mayfield has all day to throw the football again. That's just not going to work. You can cover all you want, and you can be in good coverage. You can be in good position. But after a while, you just can't cover for that long. Something's going to open up. Someone's going to be open. So for me, it's looking at guys like Carl Granderson and Zack Baun going up against this Tampa Bay offensive line, which has not allowed a lot of sacks so far this year. But can they get the pressure on Baker Mayfield? Can they potentially get to Baker Mayfield and maybe change the tide a little bit? If they can't do that, then I have a hard time seeing this one go well for the New Orleans Saints defense, because I mean, these guys have been on fire, not just Baker Mayfield, but they've been on fire over the course of the past 2 games. And if you just give this offense time, that's what it is that they want. Time, timing, and rhythm. And if you allow them to get there without a pass rush, it's going to be really hard to slow them down.
Yeah, and I appreciate the flowers that you gave to the offensive line, but to be honest, a lot of it has to do with Baker Mayfield's ability to escape. And don't get me wrong, the offensive line has played a lot better than people expected, and they've played really well over the past couple of weeks. But Baker Mayfield has created some magic, evading sacks, avoiding sacks, and finding an open guy down the field or even an open guy in a dump off to be able to extend some plays. So it's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination for pass rushers to get to Baker. And we've seen a lot of teams be creative in the way that they're blitzing and their alignment. And it seems to be the most vulnerable place is still the interior. You have rookie Cody Malk, who has played well, but he's played well for a rookie. You have Robert Hainsey, who's the starter again this year at center in Ryan Jensen's absence, and he seems to have regressed a little bit, and he's not playing quite as well as he did in front of Tom Brady last year. You on the ends, obviously, you have Tristan Wirfs, who is an All-Pro even in his first year over at left tackle, and then Luke Gedeke, who's really revitalized his career in a very quick span. He was a guard last year and was beat like a drum. And this year on the edge, he has contained the guys like Cam Jordan, didn't allow a single pressure when he was up against Aiden Hutchinson. This guy has gone toe to toe with some of the best pass rushers in the game, and he's held his own. So if the Saints are going to get pressure on Baker, it's going to have to be some creativity on their part to overload the interior of the line and get to Baker quickly before he's able to start to extend some plays. For the Bucs, the biggest matchup for me is the combination of Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans against the Saints defense. And I wanted it so badly to be Evans against Lattimore, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And it's been kind of a forgettable year in that rivalry. Yeah. But before he exited the last game, Mike Evans had 3 catches on 3 targets for 40 yards, and he drew a pretty big pass interference penalty on Lattimore on a 3rd down play that drive resulted in a touchdown. But I'm looking to Baker and Evans to have big days for a couple of reasons. And first, they've been the duo that really gelled from the jump this year. Mike Evans has really been kind of the motor that has driven this train all season long. And Godwin has had a recent spike, which is fantastic to get him more involved. But most of the year it's been Evans. He has touchdowns in 11 of 15 games. But here's where it gets fun, Ross. Both Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield are 2 touchdowns away from each setting career highs. Mike, obviously, in receptions, Baker in passes. And Mike Evans, despite all the records that he's broken and the consistency that we've seen for 10 years, has never had multiple touchdown games back to back ever in his career. So for the 2 of them to connect and get career highs in a game together with the division crown on the line against a division rival, it's just too perfect for it not to happen. And I would dare to say that without Lattimore, although you mentioned that the back end of the Saints defense is pretty solid, they're obviously not as good. And can they match up against Evans and Godwin, who's had a resurgence, and Cade Otton? Plus, David Moore all of a sudden is getting more involved. Devin Tompkins and Trey Palmer both had touchdowns against them in New Orleans. And then, of course, you still have Rachaad White out of the backfield. Yep. Is it enough for the Saints to keep those guys in check?
Yeah, no, it's going to be extremely tough. One thing I'll say real quick: division opponent, not division rival, right? But when it comes to, hey, look, you took your shot, I get to take mine. Okay.
All right, fair.
So what I'll mention too is that of those 3 catches for 40 yards that Mike Evans had against the Saints earlier on the season, 2 of those catches for 36 were against Marshawn Lattimore. So he was getting the better of that matchup early on, up until he had to leave, which has been really a little bit of a trend for both of these guys over the course of the past couple of years, is that when we do finally get the matchup between them, either one of them leaves injured or they both get ejected or whatever. But we haven't really gotten to see a lot of that rivalry over the course of the last little bit. That part I think we can call a rivalry for sure, the way those 2 go at one another. But so now what you're looking at is, Paulson Adebo very likely being the guy to match up with him for the most part. The Saints usually play sides and don't shadow, so Isaac Yiadom will be another one to watch out for, that coverage aspect. But I'm not going to be surprised if the Saints do what they should do in this situation and maybe shade a little bit of safety help over to wherever Evans is, just to make sure that hey, you don't end up getting completely tossed up by this dude who's having another very good year. And I know I don't compliment Mike Evans very often. Most of the time I don't even acknowledge that he exists, just for the fun of the meme, but he's having a good season. And so is the Saints secondary. So it's going to be a really, really good matchup between those 2. And I think the other thing that plays a role in both of our conversations here is what does the Tampa Bay run game do? Because the Tampa Bay run game is another piece that's improved that probably doesn't get the praise that it should. And that's maybe one of those places where I get the guise of, an improved offensive line. But if the Saints, for instance, aren't able to stop the run, which is something that they've struggled with all season so far and has not gotten any better, then all of a sudden you're not putting this team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, in many passing game situations or obvious passing game situations, which then doesn't allow you to be able to pin your ears back and go after the quarterback. That could change everything if the Bucs get a good run game going.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, we're going to have to talk about what has to go right for these teams to win the game. And I want to know who you think the most important Saint on the field is this Sunday. That is coming up next on a Crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Saints and Locked On Bucs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. But thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process that much easier and quicker. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Wrapping things up here on a Crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs and Locked On Saints. And Ross, who is going to be the most important player for the New Orleans Saints on Sunday?
Yeah, I'm going to stick on the defensive side here because, look, the Saints offense has not been anything really to write home about. And so the defense has to really be able to keep this team in contention, particularly going into the second half, where all of a sudden this offense tends to wake up a little bit, which I know wasn't the case the last time these two teams met, but has been the rhythm here recently. So I'm gonna stay with the defensive line, and I'm gonna go with Carl Granderson here. I think Carl Granderson has a big game and is able to do what he did toward the end of last season, where he racked up quarterback hits, he racked up sacks, he racked up pressures late in the season. He was able to do that again, then it gives the Saints the best chance to be able to be in conversation for this game. But if he and the rest of the pass rush aren't able to really get home or impact Baker Mayfield enough, then this one could get away from them pretty quickly.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, especially with the way the Bucs offense has been clicking. But for the Bucs, I know everyone probably expects me to say Mike Evans. We even had a new addition to the backdrop just for you this week. For those watching on YouTube, this is the jersey that my son was given, or he got, and then it was signed by Mike Evans last year. But stop me if you've heard this one before. It's Antoine Winfield Jr. This guy is unreal. And a wild statistic that popped up on my Twitter feed, courtesy of Greg Allman, who covers all of the NFC South for Fox Sports. Antoine Winfield Jr. has 5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, and 3 interceptions. Only one time in the last 25 seasons has anyone even had 3 of each. And that was James Ferrier back in 2004, the year I graduated high school. Wow. That's how long it's been since something like this has happened. So Antoine, who played a huge role in that first game, he had the forced fumble and fumble recovery at the end of the first half. Then on a deep ball to Chris Olave that would have gotten the Saints right back in it, it was Antoine that had the pass breakup to prevent that score. So the defense runs through Antoine Winfield Jr. I fully expect him to have another huge game, and really glad that after he left the game against the Jaguars, he was not on the injury report on Wednesday. So it looks like he is good to go. Ross, what has to go right for the Saints to win this one?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. Let me say real quick on Antoine Winfield Jr., though. The thing that I think is so cool about that is that, like, this is a guy that came into the NFL as mostly the narrative around him was run, support, safety. And now he's showing what he could do further away from the line of scrimmage. It just kind of goes to show you that, like, when you get the right minds in the building to work with the right player, that those players can add elements to their game and that it's not too late just because you're in the NFL all of a sudden. In fact, your time is just getting started. So really cool to see for Antoine Winfield. And I think it's something like you look at like Zack Baun this past year and all this other stuff. Like there's examples of that over in the Saints defense as well. Look, I mean, I think it's got to be a little bit of everything. It's got to go right for the Saints. This has got to be one of those games where things just kind of have to go perfectly. That seems to be the way that Pete Carmichael is most comfortable running the offense. If everything's going perfectly, everything works out. But the moment that kind of, a big decision has to be made or anything like that, it's just kind of like a jump back, scared kind of knee-jerk reaction to where, all the bad habits start to come back up. Running on 2nd and 10 after incomplete passes, deep shots on 3rd and short, all these other things that have plagued the Saints from a play calling perspective all season. And so in order for that to happen, it's got to go back to the defensive side. They've got to be able to get pressure. They've got to be able to force turnovers. And most importantly, they've got to be able to score off of those turnovers. That's been the key to success, if you will, for the New Orleans Saints all season. Is not only generating takeaways, but being able to score off of those takeaways as well. So it's going to be a big task. It's got to be a lot of complimentary football. They got to win the field position battle and special teams. Like it's got to be a little bit of everything that's got to go right for this New Orleans Saints team in order for them to get this win. I don't think a lot of Saints fans are even really like hoping for a win in this game. I think a lot of folks are kind of like get good draft position and everything at this point. But if the Saints want to get a win, which they most certainly do. I mean, I was walking through the locker room today. Everyone's excited. Everybody's positive. Everybody's expected to go into this game and compete. That's exactly the attitude that they should have. Just the attitude on the outside of the facility is very, very different when it comes to this game. What's got to go right for the Bucs?
I think for the Bucs, they need to not read their own press clippings. There's been a lot of praise heaped on this team over the last month, and especially Baker Mayfield over the last 2 weeks. And then you had the story of Devin White, who all of a sudden is inactive against the Green Bay Packers. And there's conflicting reports. Was it his foot or was it his ego? Why is he inactive? And then he comes out and he's PFF's highest graded linebacker for week 16 for an absolutely stellar performance against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Forced 2 turnovers, should have had 1.5 sacks. One got taken away on one of the worst roughing the passer penalties that I think even you would agree we have ever seen. So they need to make sure that they stay focused and keep the mentality that they've had over the last month. They have not clinched anything yet. They cannot start swelling up and thinking, okay, all of a sudden 4 in a row. It's easy street now. No, got to stay focused, got to keep putting together wins. And even with a loss to the Saints, they can still win the division, but you don't want to have to clinch in the final week because anything can happen there. So for the Bucs, keep doing what they've been doing and don't get too big of a head over the course of what has happened. So What do you see happening in this one? What is your final score prediction here, Ross?
Yeah, I think we get to finally say kind of like good night to the Saints season after this week. I think that the Bucs are the better team going into this one. I think New Orleans is remarkably talented, and they're one of those teams that has the ability when everything goes perfectly to beat a lot of teams in the NFL, to hang with some of the best in the NFL. But that's just not going to happen. That's not the way that the game of football works. You have to be able to manage adversity, and the Saints have not shown a propensity to be able to do that on a consistent basis. So I'm taking the New Orleans Saints to lose this game, and I would take them to lose this game potentially by multiple scores, something like 34-21, 34-20, something like that. Like I don't think that this New Orleans Saints team is going to come into this game ready the way that Tampa will come into this game ready, knowing that if they win this game, they're in. That's huge for me in terms of the mentality of this one.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you across the board on that one. I do see the Bucs coming in super focused and ready to win this game, clinch that division, and quiet a lot of the doubters that they had leading up to the season and most of the season. I see the Bucs winning this one probably 27-13, 27-14, right there in that range. But real quick, Ross, you and I talked after our last crossover that we were going to do a bet on this game where if the Saints won, I was going to have to wear a Michael Thomas shirt. And then after our crossover, one of your listeners reached out to David and said that they needed David to come back because I had the audacity to refer to Taysom Hill as Diet Tebow. Something that is my equivalent to your Mike Evans do it for the meme. I have called Taysom Hill Diet Tebow for a long time. Yeah. So I felt that the fitting one would be I would have to wear a Taysom Hill shirt, but if the Bucs won, you had to wear a Mike Evans shirt. But it seems like you're not really ready to pull the trigger on that one coming into this week.
No, I was all about it when I thought this game was going to be interesting. I don't think this game's going to be very interesting in terms of the competition between the two teams. I think the game will be interesting, but you know what I mean. But here's what I would be willing to do. Why don't we put something on? We could do the same thing, but put it on Mike Evans scoring a touchdown. Maybe Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield hitting that 2 touchdown mark. I think 2 touchdowns in a game is kind of hard to ask for and everything. It's just that would be like a little unfair to you. But I would definitely go with the Mike Evans touchdown in this game. That's maybe a little bit weighted against me, but I like it.
That is a little weighted against you. I don't know if I would go full Taysom Hill shirt if Mike Evans doesn't score. But what I will do is I will retire the Diet Tebow moniker forever.
Nah,
I will never.
What if it was Mike Evans scores a touchdown? I'll wear the Mike Evans shirt. And this is for like this is like for our crossover. This is like our division preview for our division preview stuff. But if Taysom scores a touchdown, you wear the Taysom shirt.
Ooh. Okay, but if they both score, does it offset?
Yeah, we could say it's offset. That's fair.
Deal.
Yeah, that feels fair, right? Like they're both as likely, I'd say.
Okay. All right. So you heard it here first. One of us potentially could have to wear the other team's gear on the divisional crossover next year in front of Aaron of Locked On Falcons and Julian of Locked On.
You would never let us live it down.
All right, but that is going to do it for this crossover episode of Locked On Bucs and Locked On Saints. Make sure you are coming back tomorrow as both of these shows are going to put a bow on the final preview. Make sure you are checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you so much for joining us right here on a Crossover Thursday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.